Starting a new React Native project in 2025, you've probably noticed there are dozens of options for every single feature you need to build. In this video, I'll walk you through all the technology you should know about and use to ship epic React Native apps. What's up, React Native friends? Simon here from galaxies.dev. You probably heard that 2025 is the time for React Native. Maybe because YouTube recommended a certain video to you? And it's true, React Native is better, more performant, more stable than ever. And the community and packages around it are fantastic. React Native will also only get better from here, making the developer experience even more pleasant. However, starting a new project is usually still painful, as there are so many great packages and you can easily waste a lot of time trying out 5 different libraries that all don't fit your needs. Trust me, been there, done that. In the next 15 minutes, you'll learn which tools and packages to choose for your dev setup, navigation, state management, UI components, and essential utilities and everything else you need to start building. If you also want to get practical with building React Native apps right now, check out my brand new Zero to Hero mission on galaxies.dev. This mission is divided into different modules to teach you everything from the basics of Expo to building real-world apps and submitting them to the app stores. It's the one course that will help you go from idea to finished app while learning the essentials of React Native. But for the moment, let's dive into our first category. First of all, let's talk about the core setup of your React Native application. There are just a couple of things you should keep in mind, and there's pretty much nothing to discuss about them. If you're getting started with React Native in 2025, you want to use Expo. Expo is the recommended framework inside of the React Native documentation, and yes, you can use it without a framework. However, if you're building a new app with React Native, we recommend using a framework. Otherwise, you're pretty much at the end building your own framework. And I know some people still like the community CLI, and some people have some objections against Expo, which are not true. I've got several videos on that. So if you're starting now, use Expo. Yes, if you have to work with legacy projects in your company, you might be exposed to the community CLI. However, even in that case, I recommend you should slowly migrate to Expo, because every big company I know is also using Expo. Just like that, you should also use TypeScript. I bring this up every year, and usually I get emails about this every year. Can I use it without TypeScript? Yes, of course you can, but you will only benefit from using TypeScript. And those strange enum, union, whatever types you sometimes see on Twitter, that's most likely not what you're gonna end up using in your application anyway. You will just be happy that your compiler or your IDE will tell you, oh, this is not a string, you're returning a number from that function. And you sit there, well, that is true, that helped me solve a bug. So please just use TypeScript. A bit more challenging is whether you want to use Expo Router for navigation or React Navigation. These are two, well, they're kind of the same things. Under the hood, Expo Router is actually using React Navigation. React Navigation was there before, it still exists. To me, I prefer Expo Router because I really like all the tools that Expo brought in. And this setup of using file-based routing for your application just feels really good to me, actually. And I've used this now for like 2 or 3 years. I don't know how long this has been out. And it's coming out with many cool things like API routes. We have DOM components, we have RC support with Expo Router now. However, this is kind of made for like thinking about native applications in a more cross-platform way, which could also target web. If you say like, I just want to build native applications and want to focus on iOS and Android, and I like the concept of screens, then maybe using React Navigation could be enough for you. But with that being said, I still recommend Expo Router for everyone getting started, because it's really an easy way to think about the setup and the layout of your application. And one addition to this is a package I discovered last year called React Native Bottom Tabs, which gives you the ability to have real native bottom tabs in your application, which look a lot more smooth on both Android and iOS. So go check that out if you're using a tabbed bar. And then let's head to the next category. Talking about UI and styling is somewhat challenging because every project prefers a different approach, a different UI, you have a different favor, and in general we have component libraries and we have styling libraries that we should talk about. So in the past, many people used big component libraries like React Native Paper or React Native Elements. I don't really see a lot of people using them actually in projects. However, they still have a lot of downloads. So some people are still using them and prefer using them. They're not really my cup of tea. I'm usually more like styling solutions like Native Wind, which brings Tailwind CSS to React Native, or the project like Unistyles, which simply has pretty much the same API as the style sheet in React Native, but enhances it with a lot of great functionalities, and version 3 of Unistyles is right around the corner. And maybe you've also heard about ShadCN, which is like super popular on the web, and React Native Reusables brings this concept to React Native in a super interesting way. So this is definitely something to keep an eye on and something that can work for some projects. And then we also have Tamagui as sort of like a crossover because it involves styling, it has some components, and it also has an optimized compiler. Last year I recommended Tamagui as well, and I think it's still going strong. It's also used in one framework, which Nate announced last year, and if you can set up Tamagui, which is a bit more challenging than most of the other solutions, you are rewarded with a pretty solid and very fast and stable system that works cross-platform across iOS, Android, and web. I don't really see a clear winner in this category yet. It is a lot about flavors and what fits your style of project. Personally, in my project, I currently prefer Native Wind because I know a lot about Tailwind. AI generation is pretty good, and with Native Wind, you get all of this with React Native. And then there are also packages like Native Wind UI, which gives you access to pre-built components using Native Wind under the hood. But I definitely see how many people like Unistyles, as it's just like a drop-in replacement for Style Sheet, and with the C++ bindings internally, it's super cross-platform for your application. I would also love to see an implementation of Swift UI components, and I think there are a couple of libraries already working on that, but so far there's no mainstream library that I would recommend at this point. To wrap up UI and styling, let's quickly also talk about animations. Just like before, I highly recommend React Native Reanimated. This is probably the best thing you can use to include animations in your application. And if you want something that works a bit easier, you can also check out Moti from Fernando Rojo. This one's still going strong, and it's quite easy to use, and actually a super interesting library as well. In most cases, your application needs some sort of state management, but we need to distinguish between server state and actual app state and little settings you have in your application. And for the first thing, the winner is pretty clear. If you want to manage server state, API calls, anything like that, you want to use 10-stack query in your application. 10-stack is by now actually a tool, a suite of tools, and 10-stack start and router are coming in very strong on the web as well. However, 10-stack query is the perfect choice for managing server state. On the app state, there's usually a clear winner as well, which is Zustand. I think I said this last year as well, and it's also, if you look at the JavaScript Rising Stars, the one library here at the top, far above Yotai and the other libraries. Zustand is a bit different. It has the concept of like a store and actions that you might have actually seen with Redux before, whereas Yotai and some other libraries are more atomic. They have like these atoms that you can set and influence. Beyond that, I think in general the recommendation would be to use Zustand. However, if you then also talk about local first and syncing your state, something like Legend State could come in very handy. I tried Legend State last year, and you can actually sync pretty easily even to something like Supabase. But beyond that, you can also use like SQLite solutions and then use PowerSync or other libraries and services to implement local first and sync. Think about the needs of your application first before you jump into any of the popular state management libraries. And maybe for some applications, the answer is to simply use the context API, and that's fine as well. Besides all the packages, we should also quickly talk about some essentials for like the tooling you use. And my recommendation is to actually at this point use an AI supported editor. I switched from VS Code to Cursor. You've seen me use it in a couple of videos. It is great at generating code across multiple files. It works really, really great. I know there's also by now, I think, Windsurf for the new editor, and VS Code has also some improved stuff with AI going on. Just make sure you have some AI capabilities, and I just recommend Cursor. Besides that, for testing, I recommend you use Maestro. Maestro is really great for UI testing, and I used it before. It's really easy to set up and just a pleasure to work with. And if you're talking about testing, you also want to take a look at React Native testing library. Steve, who was guest on the podcast, has also a very great guide. I think you can find it here in the repository. He has many code examples that you can take a look at and how to do this. And they even have a pretty good a cookbook here on how to use something like async tests and custom render functions. And this is really the way to go with testing. Now, beyond that, if you want monitoring of your bugs and performance of the application, I highly recommend Sentry. I use this in my own apps. I've worked with Sentry before, and I can just recommend them 100%. I'm really happy that I'm using Sentry, as it's catching all the bugs and problems of my application in real time. Now, for CI/CD solutions, I wouldn't spin up my own server anymore. Just use Expo EAS. It's honestly the best thing you can do to your React Native project. It is so unbelievable easy to use. You just push your code, it builds in the cloud, it automatically submits your application to iOS and Android if you set up the right pipelines. You can use EAS updates. There's so much more to it. They're making it better. In December, I think they announced workflows, which replaces a part of you can see with GitHub Actions. So honestly, if you're looking for a CI/CD solution, go with Expo. And regarding debugging, I have a separate video, but basically you can now use the React Native debugging tools and a bit of Expo for that. So check out the video React Native debugging from JavaScript to native and you will see how it works. The only addition I can make to this is that besides the usual tools you have available in your project anyway, you could also check out Reactortron from Infinite Red, which looks a bit old school. Jamin, I know you're watching this, and Jamin will work on this year, but it has some pretty cool functionalities that I also explained in the React Native debugging video. Finally, I want to mention some must-have packages. I think these packages are just awesome, and yeah, I know not every app needs to have them, but I still think if you kind of need a functionality like that, you must use these packages. One of them is definitely React Native MMKV by Mark Rosavi and the team at Magello. I use this all the time. It's the fastest key value storage. Whenever you need to quickly track a setting, I don't want to use async storage, just use MMKV. It's so much faster. Besides that, you also want to use a library to manage your forms, and React Hook Form works pretty flawless with React Native. You can even include Zod for type safe forms, and I used this before in the 0 to Hero course as well. It is just great. Speaking of lists, I said this a couple of times before, I had a video on this, just use flash list. Don't lose flat list, just go with flash list. It is pretty much the same API, but it's a lot faster. So not only do we have legend state, we might also have legend list soon with a pretty epic performance. Keep an eye on this. It's probably not yet production ready, but this is something that could come up later in 2025. Additionally, you want to use the Expo image package when you display images. This package is really designed for speed, and it has built-in memory and caching and a lot of cool functionalities. So just do yourself a favor and use it. Another library I love to use is called Zigo. This is actually like really a niche thing, but it's so amazing. The drop-down menus and the context menus, like these overlays when you do a force touch on iOS, it just looks amazing with Zigo. Give it a try. The integration is quite easy. The documentation here can be a bit challenging, but once you get the hang on how it works, it is awesome. My go-to recommendation as well for authentication is Clerk, because if you're serious about authentication, it's not just exchanging JWTs and like attaching them to your header. If you want a user management platform, then Clerk is the way to go. I've used this in a couple of my videos. You can easily include social providers, you can manage your users. There's just no way around Clerk if you're really serious about making sure your application is secure and you can manage the users accordingly. If you also want to monetize your application, don't go straight for the APIs of Apple and Google, just use RevenueCat. I use RevenueCat in my own apps. It's just a pleasure to sync your products from Apple and Google to RevenueCat and then integrate their SDKs with React Native. It works absolutely flawless. Finally, I'm coming back to another package from Mark Rosavi, which is the React Native Vision Camera. So I haven't used this a lot because most of my apps don't really use the camera, but if you're serious about using camera and you want the best performance, go check out React Native Vision Camera. It's really the best in town you're gonna find for capturing photos, videos, QR code, barcode scanning, and everything else. It's unbelievable fast. Willy, that is the thing Mark knows best about. He has also built Nitro modules, so he knows about like all the C++ stuff. Trust that guy. And finally, because I couldn't fit it into any other category yet, I just want to mention the React Native gesture handler is your best friend if you need to capture gestures. Whether it's a pen gesture, a rotation, I think I never used that before, or a fling, or a long press, or anything in between, use the React Native gesture handler, which is usually already included in your Expo application when you start a new app. Alright, that was actually quite a lot, but I hope this gave you a good idea of the best available packages you can and to some degree should use to build a React Native app in 2025. I don't really expect a huge shift in terms of recommendations besides the UI category, which is traditionally hard to predict, but overall, that's a good signal because it shows we have awesome packages and highly skilled people in the React Native community, which makes building performant apps a lot easier and more enjoyable. But let me know in the comments if you have another favorite package you recommend that I missed. If you also want to build and ship your first React Native app in 2025, check out the new Zero to Hero mission at galaxies.dev/missions, which is, by the way, included in the monthly membership. So you get access to a full React Native course at a fraction of the usual cost of these courses, plus all the existing courses and community of Galaxies. If you're still unsure whether React Native is the right technology in the first place, check out why I think 2025 is the best time to get into React Native. And I'm pretty sure most of you would agree. Until next time, and happy coding, Simon.